Nathan Caldwell threw the letter onto the station platform, and then he laughed, cold and easy, the laugh of a man who had never once been made to answer for anything. He turned to the woman standing in front of him, a woman who had sold everything she owned to get to this moment, and he said, "Did you really think a man like me would want a woman who comes with someone else's child?" The crowd laughed with him, and Amelia Whitmore, who had crossed half the country on the strength of 6 months of letters, who had sold her mother's rocking chair and her dead husband's writing desk to buy 2 train tickets, stood on that platform in the Montana cold and did not make a sound. If you believe that cruelty like this deserves an answer, hit like and let this story know it matters. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because what this woman builds from the wreckage of that moment is something nobody on that platform saw coming, least of all Nathan Caldwell. The train was 40 minutes late into Red Bluff, and by the time it groaned to a stop along the platform, Amelia Whitmore had already rehearsed the moment 100 times in her head. She'd imagined it so often it had stopped feeling like imagination and started feeling like memory. She would step down onto the platform and there would be a man, not a perfect man, she wasn't that foolish anymore, but a decent one. Someone who had written to her for 6 months about the loneliness of winter in Montana, about how his ranch house had too many rooms and not enough noise, about how he thought Lily sounded like exactly the kind of child who deserved a yard to run in. She'd imagined the moment she'd see his face and match it to his handwriting, and she thought she might cry a little, and that would be fine, because he'd seemed like the kind of man who wouldn't hold a woman's tears against her. She had been wrong about a great many things in her 31 years. "Mama," Lily tugged at her coat sleeve. "Are we there?" "We're there, baby." "Is it cold?" Amelia looked out the window at the platform, at the gray February sky pressing down on the wooden buildings, at the thin crust of snow along the edges of the road. "A little," she said. Lily considered this with the solemnity of a child who has learned not to complain about things that can't be changed. She was 3 years old and she had already learned that. Amelia didn't know whether to be proud of her or heartbroken. She picked up the suitcase, the single suitcase that held everything they owned now because she'd sold the rest, and took Lily's hand, and they made their way to the end of the car. The conductor helped them down the steps without being asked, which was kind, and Amelia thanked him. And then she was standing on the platform of Red Bluff, Montana, with the wind cutting through her coat like it had a personal grievance against her. She looked for Nathan Caldwell. She found him immediately. He was impossible to miss. Tall, broad-shouldered, standing with a group of 5 or 6 men near the far end of the platform, and when he saw her looking at him, he said something to the men beside him, and they all turned to look at her at once. That was when she felt the first cold thread of wrongness pull through her chest. She walked toward him anyway, because what else was there to do? Lily walked beside her, holding her hand with both of hers, her small boots making careful sounds on the platform boards. "Mr. Caldwell?" Amelia said. Nathan Caldwell was around 40, with a wide jaw and pale eyes, and the kind of easy confidence that came from having never been seriously challenged by anything. He looked her over the way a man looks at livestock he's considering purchasing, and he didn't extend his hand. "That's me," he said. She waited for something else. A greeting. A hello. Something that resembled the man who had written to her about the quality of silence in a Montana winter, about how he'd tried to learn to bake bread and failed badly enough that his ranch hand had refused to eat it. Nathan Caldwell looked at the men beside him and said, "Well, boys, she actually came." One of them laughed. Just one, at first. "I told you she would," said the man to Nathan's right. Didn't I say she'd come all the way out here?" "You did," Nathan agreed. He was smiling now, and it was the kind of smile that Amelia recognized from a very specific kind of man, the kind who had decided that cruelty was a form of entertainment, and that the people he hurt didn't quite count as people. "I told you, $20 says a desperate woman with a kid will believe anything you write her." The cold thread in Amelia's chest turned into something heavier. She stood very still. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. "What did you say?" Nathan looked at her directly for the first time. There was nothing apologetic in his expression. There was nothing in it at all, really, except mild amusement. I said I made a bet. 6 months ago, I bet these men that I could write letters to a widow with a child, the kind of woman who's got no good options left, and get her to pack up and come out west thinking she'd found herself a husband. He paused. Turns out, I was right. One of the men counted out a stack of bills and handed them to Nathan with a grin. Amelia's grip on Lily's hand tightened. She was aware, distantly, of other people on the platform. A woman waiting for luggage. A railroad man moving freight. 2 older men watching from the bench near the station door with expressions she could not read. She was aware of all of them, and she could not move. "The letters," she said, "were something my friend Harold here wrote, mostly," Nathan said, gesturing to the man on his left, a thin-faced man with ink stains on his fingers. "He's got a talent for that kind of thing, poetic, sincere-sounding. Said it'd be more convincing if it seemed like a lonely rancher who wasn't good with words." Nathan shrugged. "It worked." "It worked," Amelia repeated. "Don't take it too hard." His voice had the particular quality of a man performing generosity in front of an audience. "You got a train ride out of it. Saw some country. I'd head back to Missouri if I were you. Find yourself some local—" "Mama?" Lily said softly. Amelia looked down at her daughter. Lily's face was pressed against her mother's side, turned away from the men, but her eyes were wide and tracking, the way a child's eyes track when they don't understand what's happening, but understand that it is bad. Something shifted in Amelia. Not courage, exactly. Not yet. It was something quieter and colder, the particular stillness that settles over a person who has run out of the energy required for panic. She looked back at Nathan Caldwell. "You wrote to me for 6 months," she said. "Harold did, mostly. I contributed. You wrote about your mother's quilt on the spare bed, about the creek that runs behind the north pasture, about how Lily's name sounded like the kind of name a kid who was going to be fine would have." Something flickered across Nathan's face. Not guilt. Discomfort, maybe. The discomfort of someone who hadn't expected to be quoted back at himself. "You wrote that," Amelia said. "About her name." "It was a letter," he said. "It didn't—" "I sold my furniture," Amelia said. "I sold the rocking chair my mother left me. I sold the writing desk that Thomas built with his own hands 3 months before he died. I sold every piece of furniture in that house so that Lily and I could eat and save enough for the train." The laughter around them had quieted a little, not stopped. Nathan's friends were still smiling, still waiting for him to make something amusing out of this, but quieted. "That's not my problem," Nathan said. "No," Amelia said. "I can see that it isn't." She did not cry. She had cried on the train, in the small hours of the night with Lily asleep across her lap, when she'd thought about Thomas and the way grief could follow a person into their sleep and sit on their chest until dawn. She had used up a great deal of her crying on that train. She had none left for Nathan Caldwell. He seemed bothered by this, by the fact that she wasn't dissolving, wasn't giving him and his friends the performance they'd apparently been anticipating. He said more sharply, "You should have known better. A man with money and land doesn't send for a woman who's already got someone else's child. What did you think this was?" "I thought it was a chance," Amelia said quietly. "I was wrong about that." "You were wrong about a lot of things, sweetheart." Lily made a small sound against her side. Not a word, just a sound. And Nathan Caldwell looked down at Lily, looked at this child who had done nothing, who had traveled for 2 days in a train car because her mother believed something, who was 3 years old and frightened and hiding against her mother's coat, and he smiled. "Cute kid," he said. "Be a shame for her to grow up with a mother who can't make better decisions than this." That was when the voice came from behind her. "That's enough." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had the quality of something that had never needed volume to be heard. A voice that had learned at some point that patience was more effective than noise. Amelia turned. The man standing at the edge of the platform was somewhere in his late 30s, lean in the way of men who do physical work every day, rather than men who exercise at it. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, and he was wearing a coat that had been good quality once and had since become simply reliable, and he was looking at Nathan Caldwell with an expression that was completely, utterly flat. She did not know him. She had never seen him before. But every person on the platform clearly had. She could tell by the way the atmosphere changed when he spoke, the way Nathan's friends shifted slightly, the way Nathan himself straightened up by about half an inch. "Caleb," Nathan said, and managed to make it sound casual. "Stay out of this. It's just a—" "I heard what it is," the man said. He looked at Amelia for a moment. Not the way Nathan had looked at her, not assessing, not dismissive, just looking. Then he looked back at Nathan. "Walk away. We're just having a conversation." "No," the man said. "You're not." Nathan's jaw tightened. "This woman came out here on her own. She came out here because you lied to her for 6 months." The man's voice hadn't changed in pitch or volume. "And now you're standing on a public platform humiliating her in front of your friends because you think it's funny. So I'm telling you to walk away. Once." There was a long pause. Nathan looked around at his friends. There was calculation in his expression, the calculation of a man deciding whether the audience would find it more entertaining if he pushed back or backed down. He seemed to decide something. "Your loss," he said to Amelia, and turned and walked away, and his friends followed him, one of them laughing about something quietly as they went. Amelia stood on the platform. Lily had turned around now, watching the man with the gray temple hair with the frank, assessing curiosity of small children who have no instinct yet for performing indifference. "My name is Caleb Wilder," the man said. He was speaking to Amelia, but he was looking at Lily with what appeared to be genuine attention. Not the performance of adult friendliness, but actual attention. "I own the Wilder Ranch, about 6 miles east of town." "Amelia Whitmore," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "And this is Lily." "Hello, Lily," Caleb said. Lily considered him for a moment. Then she said, "Your coat has a hole in the elbow." He looked down at the elbow in question. "It does," he said. "I've been meaning to do something about that." "Mama can sew." "Lily," Amelia said. "She can," Lily insisted, with the maddening literalism of a 3-year-old who had not yet learned when to stop being accurate. A woman to Amelia's left, the one who'd been waiting for luggage, middle-aged, with a sharp face and intelligent eyes, made a small sound that might have been a laugh quickly suppressed. Amelia didn't look at her. Caleb Wilder didn't smile exactly, but something in his expression shifted, marginally. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" he asked. This was directed at Amelia. "I'll find a hotel. The hotel here is $2 a night and the roof leaks when it rains." "I'll manage." "I don't doubt it," he said, and the way he said it, without the particular inflection that men often used when they said things like that to women, the inflection that meant "I don't think you will, but I'm being polite," was so unexpected that Amelia didn't have an immediate answer. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the same flatness he'd turned on Nathan, except that it wasn't hostile exactly. It was just the expression of a man who had learned that the world contained a certain amount of difficulty and that acknowledging it directly was more useful than pretending otherwise. "I have a spare room," he said. "2, actually. My ranch hand left in November, and I haven't replaced him. The rooms are empty, and they're dry. You're welcome to them until you figure out what you're doing next." Amelia said, "I don't know you." "No." "I don't have any reason to trust you." "No," he said again. "You don't." She waited for him to fill the silence with reassurances, with the particular verbal flood of a man trying to convince a woman of something. He didn't. He just stood there in his coat with the hole in the elbow, waiting, as if he had nowhere else to be and no particular preference about how this resolved. "Why?" she said. He seemed to think about that for a moment. Not the way a man thinks about how to make an answer sound better than it is, just thinking. "I've known Nathan Caldwell for 10 years, he said finally. "What he did today was the worst thing I've seen him do, and that's saying something. You're a stranger in a town that just watched you get humiliated. The hotel roof leaks. You have a child." He paused. "Those are the reasons." Amelia looked at Lily. Lily was looking at Caleb with an expression that, in an adult, would have been described as cautious optimism. "I can pay for the room," Amelia said. "I have a little money left." "We'll discuss it," he said, which was not the same as agreeing. She looked down at her single suitcase. She thought about the rocking chair she'd sold. She thought about Thomas, who had been dead for 2 years, and who had never in his life left her standing on a train platform. She thought about Lily, who needed to eat dinner and sleep in a bed, and who was 3 years old and had not signed up for any of this. "All right," she said. Caleb Wilder's wagon was old, and the seat was hard, and the road from Red Bluff to his ranch was 6 miles of frozen dirt that the wagon found every rut in. Lily fell asleep within 10 minutes, which was a mercy. Amelia sat beside Caleb in the cold and watched the land open up around them. Montana in February had no interest in being beautiful. The sky was the color of old tin, and the hills were brown and gray and white, where the snow had collected in the low places, and the wind found every gap in her coat. She'd grown up in Missouri, which had its own variety of cold, but there was something about this cold that felt personal, as if the landscape was conducting an audit of what a person was actually made of. "You're not going to ask me questions?" she said after a while. Caleb glanced at her. "About what?" "About why I came. Why I believed him." She heard the edge in her own voice and couldn't entirely smooth it away. "Everyone else seems to have an opinion about it." "I expect they do," he said. "But not you." He looked back at the road. The horses knew it, she could tell. They moved with the particular ease of animals following a familiar path. "I've made a bad decision or two myself," he said. "Believed someone who turned out to be worth less than their word. I'm not in the habit of asking other people to explain theirs." Amelia sat with that for a moment. The wagon hit a rut, and she grabbed the seat board to keep from sliding sideways, and Lily shifted in her lap, but didn't wake. "I'm not a charity case," Amelia said. "I didn't say you were." "I'm saying it, for the record." "Noted," he said. "I can work. I've managed a household, tended animals, kept accounts. I can earn my way." She stopped, aware that she was stating her case to someone who hadn't challenged it, which was a habit she'd developed in the last 2 years, the habit of justifying her own existence to people who hadn't asked. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be." She looked at the side of his face. He had the kind of face that had weathered and settled, that had made its peace with the lines it was accumulating. Not handsome in the way that Nathan Caldwell was handsome. Nathan had been good-looking in a broad, obvious way that she'd noticed even through her distress. Caleb Wilder was something different. His face was the face of someone who had decided some time ago what mattered to him, and everything that didn't matter had fallen away. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked. 12 years. Built the main house myself, mostly. First 2 years I slept in the barn. That must have been cold." "It was," he said. "It was also mine." That made a difference. Lily stirred, blinked, looked up at Amelia's face with the dazed confusion of a child waking somewhere unexpected. "Mama?" "Still here, baby." "Where are we?" "Going to a ranch. We're going to stay there for a little while." Lily looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Lily. "Do you have animals?" Lily asked. "Some," he said. "What kind?" "Horses, cattle, a dog named Porter." Lily considered this with great seriousness. "I like dogs," she said. "I'll tell him." "Does he know any tricks?" "He knows one. He can sit." "That's not very many." "No," Caleb agreed. "He's not gifted in that area." Lily thought about this. Then she apparently decided it was acceptable, because she settled back against Amelia's side and pulled her coat tighter and watched the land go by with the same serious attention she brought to most things. Amelia looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the road. She thought, "I don't know this man at all. I am sitting in his wagon with my daughter, and I am going to his house, and I know nothing about him except that he stood between me and a group of men who were laughing at me, and that is not enough to know about someone, and yet here I am." She thought, "I was wrong before, and here I am doing it again, trusting someone because he was decent to me in a moment when decency cost him something." She thought, "But Lily needs dinner and a bed, and the hotel roof leaks." She thought, "That will have to be enough for tonight." The ranch house was more than she'd expected, which wasn't saying much. She'd expected very little. It was solid, that was the word for it. Not grand, not decorated in any way that suggested anyone had thought about decoration, but built with the attention of someone who had wanted it to last. The main room had a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, and a table that could seat 6, and windows that, when Caleb lit the lamp, revealed the kind of darkness that only exists when you are 6 miles from the nearest town. There were 2 bedrooms off the main hall. One was clearly Caleb's. The door was open and she could see a bed, made with military precision, and a single hook on the wall where his other coat hung. The other room had a bed with a wool blanket folded at the foot, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto what would, in better light, probably be the north pasture. "This is fine," Amelia said. "There's food," Caleb said. "I'll get the stove going." Lily had already walked to the center of the main room and was rotating slowly, taking inventory. "Where's the dog?" she said. "Porter sleeps in the barn. I'll introduce you tomorrow." Lily accepted this with the gravity of someone receiving an official appointment. Amelia put the suitcase down on the floor of the spare room and sat on the edge of the bed, and for a moment she just sat there, with the sounds of Caleb moving in the kitchen and Lily's footsteps on the wooden floor and the wind against the windows, and she let herself feel how tired she was. Not just the tiredness of travel, though that was real. The other kind. The kind that accumulates when you have been afraid for a long time and trying not to show it, when you have been holding something together through willpower alone, and the willpower has been very quietly draining away. She thought about Nathan Caldwell's face when she'd said, "I sold the rocking chair my mother left me." She had not said it to make him feel guilty. She had said it because she needed to say it to someone, even if that someone was the wrong person, even if saying it accomplished nothing. She sat on the edge of the bed in Caleb Wilder's spare room and she thought, "Thomas, I don't know what I'm doing. I did a stupid thing and now I'm here. But Lily's going to eat tonight. She's going to sleep in a real bed. That's something. That has to be something." Thomas did not answer because he had been dead for 2 years, and the dead do not answer. But she'd found that thinking to him sometimes helped anyway, not because it changed anything, but because he had always been the person she thought out loud to, and the habit had not died with him. She took off her coat. She hung it on the hook behind the door. She went to find her daughter. Lily ate salt pork and cornbread and a cup of milk that Caleb produced from somewhere without comment, and then she fell asleep at the table with her cheek on her arm, and Amelia carried her to the spare room and tucked her into the bed and sat beside her for a while, listening to her breathe. When she came back out, Caleb was still at the table drinking coffee. He didn't look up when she sat down across from him, which she appreciated. She didn't feel like being looked at. "She'll sleep," Amelia said. "Good." A silence. "What do you want from me?" Amelia said. "For the room, for the food. I told you, we'll discuss it." "I'd like to discuss it now." He looked up then. "You can cook?" "Yes." "Then cook. Help around the place. When spring comes, if you're still here, there's planting to think about." He paused. "I'm not going to charge you rent to sleep in a room that's been empty since November." "I won't take charity." "It's not charity. I need things done that I don't have time to do. You need a place. That's a trade." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the same steadiness he'd had on the platform, the steadiness of someone who had decided something and didn't feel the need to sell it. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "You came out here alone with a 3-year-old because someone convinced you it was your best option," he said. "That tells me you're not a woman who gives up easily." A pause. "That's about all I need to know right now." She didn't have an answer to that. She was very tired. "All right," she said. "Thank you." He nodded once and looked back at his coffee, and that was the end of it. She went to bed in the spare room, with Lily warm against her side, and listened to the wind press against the walls of the house, and thought about all the ways this could still go wrong, and was asleep before she'd finished thinking. Right. The morning arrived without warning, the way mornings do in places where there are no city sounds to give you advance notice, just darkness and then the thin gray edge of light along the window frame, and the smell of coffee already being made somewhere in the house. Amelia was awake before Lily, which was usual. She lay still for a moment, taking stock. She was in Montana. She had $17 and some change in the pocket of her coat. She had a suitcase with 2 changes of clothes, a handful of things that had belonged to Thomas, a small tin of buttons, and a book of poetry she'd carried since she was 18 and couldn't explain why. She had Lily. She had apparently a room in a stranger's house for reasons that seemed, in the morning light, slightly more complicated than they had seemed at night. She got up. Caleb was already outside when she came into the main room. She could see him through the window, moving between the barn and the fence line with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this same circuit every morning for years. The stove was warm, the coffee was made. On the table there was a plate covered with a cloth, and under the cloth were biscuits, which were slightly burnt on the bottom, which she thought was probably accurate to what he'd said about his baking. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stood at the window and watched him work. He moved like a man who had made peace with his own solitude. Not lonely in the way that people are lonely when they're afraid of being alone, but solitary in the way of someone who has arranged their life around being the only person they have to account for. She had seen that quality in Thomas's father, in the years after Thomas's mother died. A self-sufficiency that was also, if you looked at it from the right angle, a kind of armor. She wondered what he'd put it on against. Then she heard Lily calling from the bedroom, and she stopped wondering and went to get her daughter, because that was the work of the morning, and the morning was what they had. She did not ask him about his past, and he did not ask her about hers. Not that first week. They established a kind of working rhythm without discussing it. She cooked breakfast and supper, managed the house, split the wood that had been left in lengths too long for the stove. He did the outdoor work, mended fences, tended the cattle and horses, handled whatever the day demanded. Lily followed whoever was most interesting, which varied by hour. On the 3rd day, she found a broom with a broken handle behind the kitchen door and spent an hour fixing it with a piece of wood she found in the barn. And when Caleb came in for dinner, he looked at the broom and then at her and didn't say anything, but he nodded, and she understood that as a kind of acknowledgement. On the 5th day, one of the horses threw a shoe, and Amelia held his head while Caleb worked, talking quietly to the animal the way she'd learned to from her own father, who'd kept 2 horses and talked to them like they were people worth having a conversation with. "Where'd you learn that?" Caleb asked. "My father," she said. "He said if you talk to them right, they'd give you their whole attention. And if they were giving you their whole attention, they weren't giving it to being afraid." Caleb looked at the horse, who was in fact standing very still. "Your father raised horses?" "He raised everything he could manage on 40 acres. Mostly he raised 4 children and wore himself thin doing it." She stroked the horse's nose. "He was a good man. Not much money, but a good man." "What was his name?" "William Whitmore. Will, mostly." "And Thomas?" He said it without any particular weight, which she appreciated. "My husband. He died 2 winters ago. Influenza." She kept her voice level. "It was fast. That's what they always say, isn't it? At least it was fast. As if speed is the same as mercy." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I don't think they're the same." She looked at him. "My wife died 8 years ago," he said. He said it the way a person says something they've said many times, in many different contexts, and have learned to say simply. "Her name was Clara. It wasn't fast." Amelia said, "I'm sorry." "So am I," he said. That was all. He finished with the shoe, and she released the horse, and they walked back to the house through the cold, and neither of them said anything else about it. But something had shifted, marginally. Some small adjustment in the air between them, some degree of distance closed. Not much, but something. On the 7th day, Amelia went into town for supplies. She hadn't planned to go alone. She'd expected Caleb to take her, or at minimum to come with her, but he had a fence down in the east pasture that was going to let the cattle scatter if it wasn't fixed by afternoon. And she'd said she could manage the wagon, because she could, and he'd looked at her for a moment and then said, "Take the bay mare. She's steadier." Red Bluff in the middle of the morning was different from Red Bluff on the day she'd arrived. The platform was empty. The main street had the quiet industry of a working town. Women going about their shopping, men moving freight, a blacksmith working 2 doors down from the dry goods store. But they knew her. She could see it. the way eyes tracked her as she tied the mare outside the general store, the way conversations didn't stop but adjusted, turned slightly in her direction like flowers turning toward light. She had been in Red Bluff for 1 week, and she was already a story. She went inside. The man behind the counter was a stocky man with red mutton chop whiskers and the expression of someone who had been told to be professional about this. He said, "Ma'am," and she gave him her list, and he went to fill it. And while he was gone, a woman came into the store. She was about Amelia's age, maybe a few years older, with dark red hair and a straight back, and the general demeanor of a person who had strong opinions about most things and had been proven right often enough to trust them. "You're the woman from the train," she said, not unkindly, just directly. "Yes," Amelia said. "I'm Helen Marsh. My husband has the feed store." She extended her hand and Amelia shook it. "I want you to know that what Nathan Caldwell did was contemptible, and I've said so to anyone who brought it up, which has been everyone." Amelia said, "Thank you. You're staying with Caleb Wilder." "Temporarily." Helen Marsh looked at her with the frank assessment of a woman taking someone's measure. "He's a good man," she said. "Caleb doesn't talk much, but what he says means something. There aren't that many of those." "So I'm learning," Amelia said. "How's the little girl?" "She's well." Amelia paused. "She's made friends with his dog." Helen smiled. "Porter is a good dog. Useless, but good." She seemed to decide something. "Come to Sunday supper," she said. "My husband will be there, and the doctor and his wife and a few others. People who are not Nathan Caldwell." Amelia stood in the general store in Red Bluff, Montana, 7 days after arriving on a train to find her future had been a joke, and she thought about saying no. She thought about saying she wasn't ready. She thought about saying she didn't know how long she was staying, and there was no point building connections, she was just going to leave. "All right," she said instead. Helen Marsh nodded as if this was the correct answer. "Good. Saturday, 5 o'clock. Marsh House is the yellow one on Elm." She left as efficiently as she'd arrived, and Amelia stood there feeling, for the first time since the train platform, something that was not quite hope but was in the neighborhood of it. Something that said, "This place has people in it who are not Nathan Caldwell, and some of them might be worth knowing, and this might not be the worst possible ending to the worst possible arrival." The man with the mutton chop whiskers came back with her supplies. She paid him. She carried everything to the wagon. On the drive back to the ranch, she let herself think about what she had. Not what she'd lost, not what had been taken from her by a man with a $20 bet, but what she actually had, here, today. She had Lily. She had $17, now 14. She had a room, and a stove, and a bay mare who knew the road home. She had a man who had stepped in front of cruelty and told it to walk away, and who had not, in 7 days, asked her for a single thing she hadn't offered first. She had a Sunday supper invitation and a woman named Helen Marsh who had already decided whose side she was on. It wasn't what she'd come to Montana for. But it was real. And real, she was beginning to think, was worth more than she'd been giving it credit for. The Sunday supper at Helen Marsh's house was the first time Amelia had sat at a table with other people in months and not felt like an obligation someone was fulfilling. There were 7 of them around the table. Helen and her husband Robert, who was a big quiet man with carpenter's hands and a slow, genuine laugh. Dr. Emmett Hale and his wife Frances, who is sharp and funny in the way of women who have learned to be entertaining in rooms that don't always take them seriously. A young school teacher named Opal Driscoll, who had come to Red Bluff from Ohio 2 years ago and was still deciding whether she'd stay. And Caleb, who sat at the end of the table and drank coffee and contributed to conversation in the measured way he did everything, which was to say carefully and only when he had something worth contributing. Lily sat between Amelia and Frances Hale and ate everything on her plate and then asked for more, which made Helen Marsh visibly happy in the way of women who express affection through feeding people. "She's got a good appetite," Helen said. "She always has," Amelia said. "Thomas used to say she ate like someone who'd been told food was going to be rationed." "Thomas was your husband?" Opal asked. "He was." There was the brief, careful silence that falls at tables when death is mentioned, and then Robert Marsh said, "How'd you find the road out to Caleb's place? That east stretch gets bad in the freeze." Rough, Amelia said. But the mare knew it. She would. That mare could find her way home from anywhere. Robert looked at Caleb. You still running her with the roan for the south pasture work? And the conversation moved, the way conversation does when people are good at it, sliding from one subject to the next without forcing anything. And Amelia found herself saying more than she'd intended to about Missouri, about her father's 40 acres, about the way spring came to the flatlands differently than it came to the hills. And nobody at that table looked at her like she was a story they were waiting to finish. Later, while Helen and Francis were clearing plates, and Robert had taken Caleb out to look at something in the barn, Opal Driscoll sat across from Amelia and said, without preamble, I saw what happened at the station when you arrived. Amelia looked at her. I was picking up a parcel, Opal said. I was standing near the door. I saw the whole thing. Then you saw more than I'd like most people to have seen, Amelia said. I saw you not cry, Opal said. I thought that was remarkable. Amelia was quiet for a moment. I cried on the train. I ran out before I got here. Still, Opal said, she seemed to want to say something else and was deciding how. Nathan Caldwell has done things like this before. Not that specific thing, but he is a man who enjoys proving that he can. She looked at her hands. I had a version of it myself, when I arrived. He decided it would be amusing to tell half the town I was engaged to him, when I'd never spoken to him in my life. It went away eventually. She paused. Some of the women here, they're good. Helen's good. Francis. If you're staying, they'll back you. I don't know if I'm staying, Amelia said. Where would you go? It was a direct question, and it deserved a direct answer. I don't know that either, Amelia admitted. Opal nodded as if this was the most reasonable thing she'd heard all evening. Then stay until you do. She thought about that on the drive back to the ranch, with Lily asleep across her lap and Caleb handling the reins in the dark, the cold settling down hard now that the sun was gone. You were quiet tonight, she said. More than usual. I'm quiet usually, he said. You are. Tonight was more. He didn't answer right away. The horses moved through the dark at a steady pace. Nathan was in town today, he said. I saw him when I came to get you. She hadn't known that. Did he? He didn't do anything. He saw me and went the other direction. Caleb's voice was flat. But he was watching. He watches things. Amelia sat with that. Is he dangerous? She asked. Caleb thought about the question, which she was learning was something he did, actually thought, rather than producing the fastest available answer. He's the kind of man who's dangerous when he feels like he's lost something, he said finally. He's never lost much, so he doesn't handle it well. He didn't lose anything. I wasn't his to lose. I know that, Caleb said. He doesn't yet. February turned into March with no particular improvement in the weather, and the ranch became something Amelia had not quite expected it to become, which was a place she knew. She knew which floorboard in the hall creaked and how to step over it when Lily was sleeping. She knew that the stove in the kitchen needed the damper adjusted at around 6 in the morning or the heat distributed unevenly and one side of the oven burned. She knew that Caleb took his coffee with nothing in it and drank 3 cups in the morning and none afternoon, and that he was at his most communicative in the hour after supper when the day's work was done, but he hadn't yet retreated to read or do accounts. She knew Porter the dog had a habit of sitting on her left foot when she stood at the kitchen window, which was inconvenient but had also, at some point she couldn't precisely identify, become something she'd miss if it stopped. She didn't examine this too carefully. Examining things carefully had not, in her recent experience, served her particularly well. What she did instead was work. She planted the seeds for the kitchen garden in pots on the windowsill in March, waiting for the ground to thaw. She repaired 2 of the fence rails on the south side of the house where the wood had gone soft from the winter damp. She sorted the accounts that Caleb kept in a ledger that was technically organized but practically chaotic, and produced a system that made sense, and presented it to him one evening at the table. He looked at it for a long time. You changed everything, he said. I reorganized it. The information's all still there. I know where everything is in the old system. You knew where everything was. This one makes more sense. He looked at her. She looked back. Fine, he said, and went back to it. And she watched him work his way through the new system and could tell by the set of his jaw when he stopped finding things where he expected them and started finding them where she'd put them instead. He didn't say it was better, but he used it. She was learning how Caleb Wilder expressed a certain category of opinion. Lily learned to ride a horse in March, not properly. She was 3 years old, and proper riding was years away. But Caleb began taking her up in front of him on the bay mare in the afternoons when the weather allowed, just walking circuits around the yard while Lily held the saddle horn with both hands and said things like, "Faster," and "Make her jump," and I want to go to that hill." "That hill is 3 miles away," Caleb told her. "That's okay. It's 4 degrees above freezing." Lily considered this. "I don't mind cold." "I do." She looked at him over her shoulder with an expression of mild skepticism that she had definitely inherited from somewhere. "You don't seem like you mind cold." "Appearances are deceiving," Caleb said. Lily filed this away with the seriousness she brought to most information. "Mama says that too," she said. "She says things that look one way can be another way." "Your mama's right." "She's right about most things." A pause. "She's wrong about beets. She says beets are good and they're not." "I agree with you about the beets." Lily looked at him again with an expression that, in an adult, would have been described as gratified vindication. "You should tell her." "Maybe I will," Caleb said. He didn't, of course, because the truth was that Amelia's opinions about beets were not something he was in the habit of challenging. He was not in the habit of challenging much about Amelia. He watched her, the way you watch something you're trying to understand without making it feel observed. And what he saw was a woman who was in the business of rebuilding something. Not just her circumstances, but herself, some part of herself that had taken significant damage and was healing in the way that damaged things heal, which was to say unevenly and not on any schedule anyone could predict. He recognized that. He'd done it himself 8 years ago, after Clara. He had not told her much about Clara. What he'd said at the fence that first week was the most he'd said to anyone in years. He wasn't sure what had made him say it, only that she'd talked about Thomas in a particular way, with the kind of plain, uncomplicated grief that didn't perform itself, that just was. And it had seemed dishonest not to answer it in kind. He was a man who didn't like dishonesty, even the comfortable kind. The trouble with Nathan Caldwell didn't materialize slowly. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in the 3rd week of March, while Caleb was out in the east pasture and Amelia was in the kitchen garden, turning the first section of ground. She heard horses on the road and looked up to see Nathan Caldwell and 2 men she didn't recognize riding toward the house. She straightened. She did not put down the garden fork. Nathan pulled up short of the fence and looked at her with the expression of a man who had decided in advance how this conversation was going to go. "Miss Whitmore?" he said. "Mr. Caldwell? I heard you've made yourself comfortable out here." "I have work to do," she said. "If you want Caleb, I don't want Caleb." He dismounted, which she hadn't expected, and came to the fence. The 2 men stayed on their horses. "I want to talk to you." "I don't want to talk to you." "I understand that." He said it like a man who had prepared for this particular response and had his next line ready. "But I think there are some things you should know. About Caleb Wilder. About why he really brought you out here." Something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the March air. She kept her face still. "I know why he brought us out here." "Do you?" Nathan put his hands on the fence rail, easy, like a man having a casual conversation. "He's been alone out here for 8 years, ever since his wife died. The whole territory knows he's been looking for someone to take over the domestic side of things, the cooking, the housework, the management. He goes through hired help the way most men go through boot leather." He paused. "I'm not saying he's a bad man. I'm saying you should know what you are to him, what the arrangement actually is." Amelia said nothing. "He's practical," Nathan said. "Always has been. Clara dying left him with a house to run and no one to run it. He's been making do for 8 years. You show up, a woman with no options and a child to feed, and you're convenient." He shrugged. "I'm not telling you anything you haven't maybe thought yourself, on some late night when you're being honest." He was not entirely wrong about that last part, and he knew it. And the fact that he knew it was the thing that made her want to put the garden fork through the fence rail. "Why are you here?" she said. What do you actually want? Nathan's expression shifted. Just slightly, just enough. I made a mistake, he said. At the station, I did a stupid thing, and I've thought about it, and I want to make it right. I want you to come work for me. Proper pay. A room in town. Somewhere for you and the girl that isn't dependent on a man's goodwill that could run out any time. You want me to work for you, she said. I can offer you something real, something that belongs to you. The way the letters belong to me, she said. The way 6 months of correspondence belong to me? His jaw tightened. Mr. Caldwell, she said, I have exactly one thing you wanted me to believe about you, which is that you thought I was worth crossing the country for. That was a lie. Everything else you've said since has been designed to make me doubt someone who has treated me with basic decency, so that I'll turn away from him and toward you. She looked at him. You want me to come work for you so that you don't have to see me every time you ride through town and remember that you lost. The two men on their horses were very still. Nathan's face did something complicated. It passed through anger and came out the other side into something colder. You think you know me, he said. I think I know exactly what you are, she said. You're making a mistake. I've made mistakes, she said. I know what they feel like. This isn't one. She went back to turning the ground. She heard him stand at the fence for a moment longer, then remount, then ride away with his men. She kept digging. Her hands were not quite steady, and she was grateful the garden fork meant they had something to do. When Caleb came back that evening, she told him. He stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him? He said. To leave? And? He did. Caleb looked at her. Are you all right? I'm fine. She paused. He said things about why you brought us out here, about what the arrangement was. She looked at the stove. Some of it wasn't, I've thought about it. I'd be a fool not to think about it. What did you think? He said. His voice was careful, not defensive. Careful. I thought you were a man who needed help around the place and saw an opportunity. She looked at him. I also thought that wasn't all of it, that there was something else. He was quiet for a long moment. The stove ticked. Outside, Porter moved around on the porch. When I saw you on that platform, he said finally, I wasn't thinking about the house. I wasn't thinking about cooking or accounts or the garden. He stopped, and she could see him choosing words with the precision of someone who had learned that words chosen wrong cost more than words not said. I was thinking that you were standing there holding your kid's hand in front of a man who just humiliated you in public, and you weren't falling apart. You were just standing, like you'd decided to wait him out. He paused. I've seen men in bad situations who couldn't do that. Amelia said nothing. I won't pretend the practical side of things isn't real, he said. It is. I need help out here, and you need somewhere to be. That's all true. But Nathan's wrong about the why. He met her eyes. I didn't bring you here because you were convenient. I brought you here because I didn't want to watch you walk away from that platform with nowhere to go, and some part of this town thinking Nathan Caldwell had won something. She looked at him for a long moment. All right, she said. All right? I believe you. She turned back to the stove. Supper's almost ready. He stood there for another moment, and she had the sense that this was not for him a conclusion, that he had more to say, or wanted to, or that the conversation had arrived somewhere that required more than all right to acknowledge. But he was also a man who knew when a subject had been set down for the night, and he went to wash his hands at the basin, and that was that. But Amelia stood at the stove and thought about what he'd said. I didn't want to watch you walk away, and turned it over quietly, the way you turn a stone and find something alive underneath, something small and unexpected that blinks in the new light. April came, and with it the thaw, and the ranch became a different kind of work. The ground opened up, and the garden went in properly. She planted squash, beans, potatoes, and a small section of flowers that she'd been nursing from seed on the windowsill, which Caleb regarded with the polite bafflement of a man who understood practical planting and was not sure what flowers were for. They're not for anything, she told him when he said exactly this. That's the point. You plant things that don't produce anything. They produce something. They just don't produce anything you can eat. She pressed a seed into the dirt. Thomas used to say I wasted time on them. Then he'd come out in the morning and stand and look at them for 10 minutes. Caleb looked at the patch of turned earth. What kind did you plant? Zinnias mostly, some black-eyed Susans, things that can handle a bad summer. Everything here needs to handle a bad summer. Exactly, she said. He didn't say anything else about the flowers, but she noticed that April and into May, he routed his morning walk past the garden patch, and sometimes he stopped. He never mentioned this. Neither did she. The difficulty with Helen Marsh was that she saw things. Not unkindly. Helen Marsh was one of the least unkind people Amelia had met, and her perception was never weaponized, never used against anyone. But she saw things, and she had an opinion about them, and she expressed her opinions in the particular way of women who have decided that the polite version and the honest version are usually the same version if you're careful enough. You two move around each other like you've been doing it for years, she told Amelia, in May, at the supper that had by now become a regular Saturday arrangement. They were in the kitchen while the men were outside, and Lily was asleep on the settee in the front room. We've had to figure out how the place works, Amelia said. We manage it together. That's not what I mean. Amelia didn't answer. I'm not pushing, Helen said. I'm just saying what I see. And what I see is two people who are very carefully not doing something. Helen. I know. She handed Amelia a dish to dry. I just think, Clara's been gone 8 years, and you've been 2 years without Thomas, and there are worse things to build than what you two are already building, she paused. Is all I'm saying. We're not, Amelia started. I know you're not, Helen said. I said building. That's what people do when they're not rushing. They build. Amelia dried the dish and didn't argue, because arguing with Helen Marsh when she was being reasonable was an exercise that produced no useful result. She also didn't argue because, if she was honest with herself, honest in the way she tried to be, in the early morning hours before the day's necessities crowded out everything else, she wasn't entirely sure Helen was wrong. It was Lily who complicated things, in the way that children complicate things, which is to say, by being completely direct about them. In May, on a Thursday evening, she asked Caleb at the supper table, Are you going to be my papa? Amelia stopped moving. From the stove, she heard her own spoon hit the pot and didn't look up. Caleb was quiet for a moment. She could hear him not answering. I don't have a papa anymore, Lily continued, with the particular tone of children who are reporting facts rather than seeking sympathy. My papa died when I was very small. I don't remember him much. I remember he smelled like wood, like sawdust, and he laughed loud. Another pause. Do you laugh? Not often, Caleb said. Why not? I don't know. Lily seemed to find this answer acceptable. Porter makes me laugh, she offered. He fell into the water trough yesterday and looked very surprised. He did, Caleb agreed. If you're going to be my papa, you should laugh more, Lily said. My papa laughed. I think it's important. Amelia finally turned from the stove. She looked at Lily first and then at Caleb. Caleb was looking at Lily with an expression she had not seen on him before, something that was not quite controlled, that had come through the usual flatness and was sitting there on his face without his permission. Lily, Amelia said carefully, that's not... We don't need to... I'm just asking, Lily said reasonably. You can say no, she told Caleb. I'm not going to be sad. I'm asking because I want to know. Caleb looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Lily. I don't know yet, he said. Is that an okay answer? Lily thought about it with great seriousness. Yes, she said, but you should figure it out. I'll work on it, he said. Good. She went back to eating. These beans are good, Mama. Amelia looked at the beans on her own plate and was grateful she had something to look at other than Caleb's face, because she was fairly certain that if she looked at his face right now, she would see something she wasn't prepared to see. She thought, Lily. She thought, of course it was Lily. She thought, 3 years old, and she just walked right up to the thing neither of us have said and asked it out loud like it was the most natural question in the world. Supper finished without further incident. Lily helped dry the dishes, which she was not very good at but enjoyed enormously, and then Amelia took her to bed and sat with her until she fell asleep with her hand curled around the edge of her blanket in the way she'd done since she was an infant. When Amelia came back out, Caleb was on the porch. She could see him through the window, not doing anything, just standing in the dark with his coffee, looking out at the yard. She went out. The night was cool but not cold, and the sky had cleared, and there were more stars visible than she'd ever seen in Missouri. She'd grown used to them, the Montana stars, in a way she hadn't expected. They were one of the things she'd miss, she thought, if she left, if it came to that. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "She's direct." "She is," Caleb said. He didn't sound bothered. "She doesn't know it's complicated." "Is it?" he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the yard, at the dark shape of the barn, at the horses moving quietly in the corral. "Complicated," he said. "Is it?" She thought about Thomas. She thought about the train platform in the moment when everything she'd believed for 6 months had turned to nothing in her hands. She thought about April mornings when she'd caught Caleb standing at the flower patch for no reason he ever explained. She thought about, "I didn't want to watch you walk away," and the way he'd said it like it was just a fact, like it was just something true that needed saying. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's all right," he said. "We don't have to know yet." She stood beside him on the porch in the dark, and they didn't say anything else. And the quiet between them was the particular kind of quiet that is not emptiness, but something else. Something that has weight to it, substance, the sense of two people in the same place choosing to be there rather than somewhere else. She looked up at the stars. She thought, there's no promise here. No letters. No 6 months of something that turns out to be nothing. She thought, there's just this porch, this man, this quiet. She thought, maybe that's enough to start with. Porter came and sat on her left foot. She reached down and scratched behind his ears and did not move away, and Caleb stood beside her in the dark, and the night went on around them with no interest in what they decided, which was fine, because for the first time in a long time, Amelia felt no particular urgency about deciding anything at all. The zinnias came up in June, not all of them, about 2/3 of what she'd planted, which was honest work for Montana soil that had never been asked to grow flowers before. They came up crooked and stubborn, the way things grow when the ground doesn't quite want them, and Amelia thought that was appropriate. She thought most things worth having came up that way. Caleb saw them on a Tuesday morning and stopped on his way to the barn and looked at them for a long moment. She was watching from the kitchen window with her coffee cup. He didn't know she was watching. He stood there with his hat in his hand, looking at the orange and yellow and deep red of them against the brown of the Montana earth, and then he put his hat back on and went to the barn and didn't mention it at supper. But that evening, when she went out to water them, she found that someone had built a small fence around the patch. 4 stakes and a length of wire. Simple, nothing elaborate, just enough to keep Porter from walking through it when he wasn't paying attention. She stood there looking at the fence for a while. Then she went back inside and made coffee, and didn't mention it either, because there were some things that were better understood than said, and she was learning slowly that Caleb Wilder communicated in that register more than any other. It was a Tuesday in the second week of June when Lydia Mercer appeared. Amelia heard the horse first, not the sound of someone riding purposefully, but the particular sound of an animal being pushed past what it wanted to do, stumbling a little, breathing too hard. She was in the garden, and she straightened up and shaded her eyes and saw a horse coming up the east road at a ragged trot with a woman bent low over its neck. She dropped the trowel and went to the fence. The woman pulled up short of the gate, and for a moment Amelia thought she was going to fall. She caught herself on the saddle horn and straightened, and Amelia got her first clear look at her face. She was young, mid-20s maybe. Dark hair, dark eyes, a face that had been pretty before something had rearranged it. There was bruising along her left jaw, and her lip was split and swollen on one side, the kind of damage that didn't come from a fall off a horse. "Is this Wilder Ranch?" the woman said. Her voice was steady, which Amelia recognized as the effort it was. "It is," Amelia said. "Come inside." I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble. Get down from that horse." The woman got down. She was shaking a little in her legs, and Amelia took her arm without asking and walked her to the porch. And by the time they reached the steps, Caleb was coming from the barn, having heard the horse. He took one look at the woman's face and said nothing. He went to take the horse. Inside, Amelia sat the woman at the kitchen table and put water on and found the cloth she used for Lily's scrapes, and thought that in this case it was going to need to be more than a cloth. "What's your name?" she said. "Lydia Mercer." "How far did you ride?" From the Mercer place. "About 9 miles out, North Road." Amelia knew the North Road. She'd been down it once with Caleb to pick up supplies from a homestead that grew winter squash. "That's a long way." "Yes." "Who did this?" Lydia looked at her hands. They were folded on the table, and the knuckles of the right one were scraped. Not from hitting someone, Amelia thought, but from falling. "My husband," she said. "Daniel Mercer." She said it the way a person says a thing they've said in their own head many times and are saying out loud for the first time. Like the words have a particular weight that shifts when they leave your mouth and hang in the air where someone else can hear them. "All right," Amelia said. Just that. Not "I'm sorry" or "that's terrible" or any of the things that were true but didn't help. Just "all right," which meant, "I hear you. This is where we are. We'll work from here." Lydia looked up at her. Something in her face relaxed marginally. The particular relaxation of someone who had been braced for a different kind of response. Caleb came in from the barn. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Lydia with the same flat attention he'd turned on most things, assessing but not unkind. "Daniel Mercer's wife?" he said. "Yes," Lydia said. There was a flinch in it, barely there. "I know Daniel," Caleb said. He didn't elaborate on what knowing Daniel meant, but something in the way he said it made it clear. He looked at Amelia. "She can stay." "I know," Amelia said. She hadn't needed him to say it, and he hadn't needed to say it for Lydia. He'd said it for himself, she thought, because he was a man who needed to hear his own decisions out loud before they were settled. "He'll come looking," Lydia said. "I don't want to bring that to you." "He can come," Caleb said. "That's my problem, not yours." Lydia looked at him for a long moment. Amelia watched her reading him the way a person reads someone when they are trying to determine whether trust is going to cost them more than they can afford. She thought she recognized that calculation. She'd done it herself 5 months ago, on this same porch. "Thank you," Lydia said finally. "Spare room's taken," Caleb said to Amelia. "Can she?" "She can have the room with me and Lily. There's space." He nodded and went back outside, and Amelia cleaned the cut on Lydia's lip and the scrape on her jaw and the place on her shoulder that was going to be a bad bruise by morning, and Lydia sat still for all of it, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that flinching draws attention. "How long?" Amelia asked. She didn't clarify, because she didn't need to. 3 years, Lydia said. "We married in 80. In the beginning, he was different, or I thought he was. Maybe I just didn't know what I was looking at." Amelia didn't say anything to that. "People will say I should have left sooner," Lydia said. "People say a lot of things about what other people should have done," Amelia said. "In my experience, most of those people have never been in the situation they're commenting on." Lydia looked at her. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I heard about you. From the women in town. Some of them said that you were unfortunate, that you'd made a poor decision coming out here the way you did." "I did make a poor decision," Amelia said. "I made it because I was out of better options and someone lied to me for 6 months. Both those things can be true." "Yes," Lydia said quietly, "they can." Lily appeared in the doorway. She'd been napping, and she had her hair on one side of her head, and her eyes were still half asleep, and she looked at Lydia with the frank, uncomplicated curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't looking. "You have an owie on your face," she said. "Lily," Amelia said. "It's all right," Lydia said. She looked at Lily. "I do have an owie on my face." "Mama fixes owies," Lily said. "She already fixed it, probably." "She did," Lydia agreed. Lily came into the kitchen and climbed onto the bench beside Lydia with the presumptuous ease of a child who assumes she is welcome everywhere until proven otherwise. "Are you going to stay here?" she asked. "For a little while, maybe." "We live here now," Lily said. This was the first time Amelia had heard her say it that way. Not "we're staying here," or "this is where we are," but "we live here," with the simple, declarative confidence of a child who has decided something is true. "Caleb has a dog named Porter. He only knows one trick, but he's nice." "That sounds like a good dog," Lydia said. "He is," Lily agreed. "I'll introduce you." Amelia stood at the stove and listened to her daughter conduct this introduction with the seriousness she brought to all important matters, and thought about what Lily had said. "We live here now." She turned it over. She thought about the fence around the flower patch, and the accounts reorganized in a system that now both of them used, and the way Caleb stepped around her in the kitchen without thinking, the way people step around someone whose presence they've incorporated into their movements without noticing. She thought, when did that happen? She didn't have a precise answer. These things didn't have precise answers. They happened the way seasons happened, incrementally, without announcement, and then one day you looked up and it was undeniably summer. Daniel Mercer came on Thursday. She had known he would. Caleb had known it too. He'd said as much on Wednesday evening, and he'd spent most of Wednesday checking the rifle and the 2 pistols he kept on high shelves and riding the fence line in a way that was not entirely about the fence. Lydia had spent Wednesday in a state of quiet dread that she tried not to show and mostly managed. She helped Amelia in the garden and told her about the Mercer place, the cattle operation, the hands who worked there, the way Daniel ran his land and his household with the same absolute authority, the same expectation that nothing and no one in either would operate outside his will. "He won't let this go," she said. It's not even about me. Not really. It's about the fact that I left, that I chose something without asking him." "You left to keep yourself safe," Amelia said. In his mind, that's the same as a betrayal. Lydia was quiet for a moment. "He'll come and he'll have men with him and he'll make it seem like a reasonable thing, like he's just collecting what's his, and some people will see it that way." "Some people will," Amelia agreed. "Some won't." "Caleb won't," Lydia said. It was a statement, not a question. "No." "How do you know that about him? You've only known him since February." Amelia thought about it. "He stepped in front of cruelty the first time he saw it," she said. "He didn't know me. He didn't know Lily. He just stepped in front of it because he couldn't watch it happen. People who do that once do it again." She pressed a bean seed into the dirt. "That's the kind of thing that's character, not mood." Lydia watched her. "You trust him?" "Yes," Amelia said. And saying it out loud, plain, unqualified, she realized it was simply true and had been true for some time, and that she'd been talking around it for weeks without actually saying it. Daniel Mercer arrived at 2 in the afternoon on Thursday with 2 men from his ranch, both of them big and unhurried, in the way of men who are confident they won't need to move fast. He was around 40, heavy-set, with a red beard going to gray and the eyes of someone who had gotten what he wanted most of his life and had built an entire interior architecture on that expectation. Caleb was in the yard when they rode up. He'd been there for an hour, doing nothing in particular, which meant he'd been there on purpose. Amelia was on the porch. She'd brought the mending with her, which gave her hands something to do. "Wilder," Daniel said. He didn't dismount. "I think you have something of mine." "I've got cattle, horses, and a dog," Caleb said. "Nothing of yours." "My wife is here." "Your wife is here because she chose to come here," Caleb said. "That's a different thing." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's my wife. She belongs home." "She belongs wherever she decides to be," Caleb said. "That is not how—" "I know how you think it works," Caleb said. "I'm telling you how it actually works. On my property." One of the men with Daniel shifted in his saddle. The other one was watching Caleb with a particular kind of attention that Amelia recognized, sizing up, measuring, calculating. Daniel looked past Caleb to the porch. He looked at Amelia. "Who are you?" he said. "Nobody you know," she said. "This is Amelia Whitmore," Caleb said. There was something in the way he said it, a small, quiet something, that she registered without being able to name it. She lives here. Daniel looked between them. Something moved in his expression, calculation or contempt or some combination. What kind of operation are you running out here, Wilder? The legal kind, Caleb said. My wife is not coming out, Caleb said, and you're not going in, so you can ride back to your place and think about what you're going to do next, or we can have a different kind of conversation. Your choice. Daniel sat on his horse and looked at Caleb, and Amelia thought she could see him going through his options like a man flipping cards. He was the kind of man who was not accustomed to being told no in his own territory. But Caleb was also a man of standing in this county, and the two ranch hands with Daniel were practical men, not loyal ones, and practical men calculated odds. This isn't finished, Daniel said. I didn't think it was, Caleb said. Daniel pulled his horse around and rode back toward the road, his men following. Caleb stood in the yard until they were out of sight. Then he turned and walked to the porch and looked at Amelia, and she looked back at him. He'll go to the sheriff, she said. Probably. Will the sheriff? Bill Kress is a fair man, Caleb said. He won't force Lydia back to a husband who put those marks on her face. He paused. But he also can't keep Daniel off public roads. He'll be back. He was right. What nobody had quite anticipated was Nathan Caldwell. The connection between Nathan and Daniel was not obvious, and she might never have known it existed, except that Helen Marsh, who knew everything about everyone in Red Bluff, the way that certain women in small towns become repositories of social intelligence, mentioned it on Saturday over supper with the careful emphasis of someone delivering important information in a casual tone. Daniel Mercer owes Nathan Caldwell a significant amount of money, she said, from a land deal that went sideways 2 years ago. Nathan holds the note. Caleb set down his coffee cup. How significant, he said. Significant enough that if Daniel can't pay it back by August, Nathan gets the north pasture on the Mercer land. Helen looked between them, which is the only profitable pasture Mercer has. Without it, the operation fails. Amelia said, and if Lydia comes back, Daniel has leverage, Helen said. He can make deals, extend promises, operate the way he's been operating. With his wife gone and the story of her leaving getting around town, his credit dries up. People don't do business with a man whose own household is publicly falling apart out here. It's not rational, but it's true. So Nathan wants her back, Amelia said. Not for Daniel's sake, for the note. Nathan Caldwell does nothing for anyone else's sake, Helen said. Caleb was very still. Amelia recognized this. The stillness that was not calm but concentration, the gathering of something before it was deployed. He's going to use Daniel, Caleb said. He'll tell him to come back, with more men maybe, or with some legal angle. Claim abandonment or... I already talked to Emmett Hale, Helen said. He knows a lawyer in Billings. Lydia can file papers. It takes time, but it starts a legal record. She looked at Amelia. She needs to be willing to say publicly what Daniel did to her, in writing, with Emmett signing as a witness to the injuries. Amelia thought of Lydia in the kitchen, the way she'd said Daniel Mercer like a fact rather than a wound. She'll do it, Amelia said. She didn't know that for certain, but she said it with the confidence of someone who had looked at Lydia for 5 days and had a sense of what she was made of under the damage. She was right. When she told Lydia that evening, Lydia sat with it for a long moment. She was sitting on the edge of the bed in the room she shared with Amelia and Lily was asleep between them, and the lamp was turned low, and Lydia's face in that light was very young and very tired, and also, underneath both of those things, made of something harder than it looked. If I sign those papers, she said, he'll never forgive it. No, Amelia said. He won't. He'll make it as difficult as he can. Yes, people will talk. Some of them will take his side just because it's easier. Yes, Amelia said. Some will. Lydia was quiet. When I left Missouri, Amelia said, I knew people would talk. I knew that a widow with a child traveling alone to marry a man she'd never met was going to be talked about. I did it anyway because the alternative was staying somewhere that was running out of room for us. She paused. I'm not saying your situation is the same as mine. It isn't. Yours is worse. but I know something about doing the thing that people are going to have opinions about because you don't have a better option. Lydia looked at her. You think I should sign? I think it's your name, your decision. I think you know what Daniel is capable of better than I do, and I think you know whether you can go back to it. Lydia looked at her hands. The bruise on her jaw was yellowing at the edges now, the body already trying to put it behind it. I can't go back to it, she said, quietly, simply. Then sign the papers, Amelia said. Nathan Caldwell came to the ranch on a Monday morning, not with Daniel's men, alone, which was either confidence or strategy, or both. He tied his horse at the fence and walked to the porch with his hat in his hand and the expression of a man who had decided to try a different approach. Caleb was in the south pasture. Amelia was alone in the house, except for Lily, who was in the yard with Porter, and Lydia, who was in the kitchen and who went very still when she heard the knock. Amelia opened the door. Nathan looked at her with something she hadn't seen on his face before, which was a version of something that might, in a different man, have been called regret. I'd like to talk, he said. You said that in March, she said. We talked. You left. This is different. He paused. Can I come in? No. He accepted this with a small nod, which told her something, that he had expected it, that he'd calibrated his approach for the version of this conversation that happened on the porch. I know about the papers Lydia Mercer is filing, he said. That's Lydia's business. It affects a business arrangement I have with Daniel. I want you to understand that. He wasn't threatening. His tone was careful, moderate, the tone of a man who had decided that threat hadn't worked and was trying something adjacent to honesty. If Daniel loses that land, I take a significant loss. I need Lydia to come home. She's not going home. Amelia, he said her name deliberately. I am trying to have a reasonable conversation with you. Woman, I'm trying to be direct with you. You brought that woman here. You and Caleb have encouraged her to file papers that are going to cost several people a great deal. I need you to understand I understand everything about this, Amelia said. I understand that you lent Daniel Mercer money, and you hold his north pasture as collateral, and you need his household intact, or your investment fails. I understand that Lydia going back to a man who broke the skin on her face is a reasonable price to pay for that, in your estimation. She looked at him. I don't share your estimation. Something moved in Nathan's expression. Not anger, not yet. Something more careful. You have made your home on Caleb Wilder's property, he said. Everything you have here depends on his goodwill. I would be careful, he said, about how many enemies you make in this town. There it was. She had been waiting for it. Mr. Caldwell, she said, you made me an enemy the day I stepped off that train. You've been an enemy of mine since February. I didn't choose it, and I haven't enjoyed it, but I've managed fine. She held his gaze. I'm not afraid of you. I know that bothers you, but there it is. He stood on her porch and looked at her, and she could see him recalculating, could see the moment he understood that this approach had also failed, that there was no version of this conversation in which she was going to do what he wanted because he asked her to, or threatened her indirectly, or appealed to practicality. You'll regret this, he said. Not a threat exactly, a prediction. Maybe, she said, but not today. He put his hat on and walked back to his horse and rode away, and Amelia stood on the porch and watched him go, and her hands were shaking, which she hadn't let him see. Lydia appeared in the doorway behind her. She must have heard everything. He's going to do something, Lydia said. Yes, Amelia agreed. What? I don't know. Something that looks legal or reasonable on the surface and isn't underneath. She turned. We need to tell Caleb. She told Caleb that evening. All of it. Nathan's visit, what he'd said about the land note and Daniel's operation, the particular quality of the last thing he'd said. Caleb listened the way he always listened, which was to say completely, without interrupting, without looking away. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He's going to try to bring Daniel in with more legal backing, he said. Claim Lydia abandoned her marital home. Get a paper signed by someone in Billings before our lawyer contact can get one filed on Lydia's behalf. He looked at the table. It's a timing problem. Then we make sure our timing is better, Amelia said. The Billings lawyer, Helen's already written to him. She sent the letter Thursday, but we can't wait for a letter response. Someone needs to go to Billings. She paused. I'll go. Caleb looked at her. I can take the Tuesday morning train, she said. I can be in Billings by afternoon. I have Lydia's account of everything, her description of the injuries, Emmett Hale's witness statement. I can go to the lawyer directly and start the process. That's a 2-day trip minimum, he said. I know. Lily can stay here, with Lydia and you. She said it before she'd fully thought about it, and then found, when she examined it, that she'd meant it. Lily staying with Caleb while Amelia was gone was not a complicated proposition. It was what the preceding 5 months had made possible. He was quiet for a moment. You'd go alone? Helen might come. I'll ask her. She looked at him. I can handle a train, Caleb. I know you can, he said. That's not... He stopped. He looked at the table again, then back at her and said, I'll come with you. You can't leave the ranch. I can leave it for 2 days. Well, Lydia would be... Robert Marsh can come out. Or I can ask Ed Cower from the neighboring property. He owes me a few days of help. He said it with the air of a man closing off an argument he's already won in his own head. I'm not sending you to Billings alone. She looked at him. I know you can handle it, he said, slightly impatiently, as if she'd accused him of thinking otherwise. I want to come. That's all. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Porter moved on the porch. From the bedroom, she could hear Lily talking to Lydia in the low, continuous murmur of a child delivering a narrative about something that had happened to her that day. All right, Amelia said. All right, he said. They left for Billings on Tuesday morning, and the ranch stayed behind them with Robert Marsh in the yard and Lydia on the porch, and Lily waving from the fence post she'd climbed against everyone's better advice. And Amelia watched the ranch get smaller through the back of the wagon and thought about the word Lily had used. We live here now. She thought about it and did not argue with it, and turned back around toward the road. The Billings lawyer was a small, precise man named Arthur Crane, who had a cluttered office above a dry goods store and a reputation, according to Helen, for being effective in direct proportion to how complicated the case was. He listened to everything. He read Emmett Hale's witness statement twice. He looked at the notes Amelia had written down, the dates, the specifics, the details Lydia had told her. And he tapped his pen on his desk and said, This is workable. How fast can you file? Caleb said. If the information is complete, end of this week. And Daniel Mercer's counterfiling? Would come after. He'd have standing to challenge, but with a documented injury record and a witness statement from a medical professional, it's a weak challenge. Crane looked at him. Are you prepared for this to be public? Yes, Amelia said. Crane looked at her. You're not the plaintiff, Miss Whitmore. I know, but I'm the one answering the question. She held his gaze. Lydia Mercer is prepared for it to be public. She knows what it costs. She's choosing to pay it. Crane looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and picked up his pen, and they got to work. They were back at the ranch by Thursday evening with copies of the initial filing and Crane's assurance that the paperwork was moving. Robert Marsh had kept everything in order. Lydia met them at the door with the expression of someone who has been waiting for news and has decided in advance to be calm about whichever way it goes. Amelia handed her the copy of the filing. Lydia read it. Her hands were very still. Her face did not change much, but something in it settled, some long-held tension releasing like a knot that had finally been worked loose. It's done? She said. It started, Amelia said. Done takes longer, but yes, it started. Lydia nodded. She folded the papers carefully and held them in both hands and didn't say anything else. And that was fine, because some things didn't need to be said. Lily came barreling in from the direction of the barn with Porter at her heels and dirt on both knees, and a story about something Porter had done that was apparently very important and had to be told immediately and in full detail, and the kitchen filled with noise, and Caleb put the kettle on, and Robert Marsh said he'd stay for supper if that was all right. And Amelia stood in the middle of all of it and thought about 5 months ago, about a train platform in February and a suitcase with everything in it and $17 and a child who needed dinner. She thought about what she'd expected this to look like and what it actually looked like. They were not the same. They were not even close to the same. She wasn't sure anymore that this was a loss. Nathan Caldwell was still out there. Daniel Mercer was still out there. The papers were filed but not decided, and there would be more days of this before it was over, more mornings of not knowing which direction the trouble would come from. But in this kitchen, at this hour, there was supper on the stove and a child who needed her knees washed, and a man who had come with her to Billings because he wanted to come, and that was real. That was, she was learning, enough to stand on. Arthur Crane sent word from Billings on a Friday, 11 days after their visit, and the letter arrived at the Red Bluff post office on a morning when the sky had gone the particular shade of heavy gray that meant rain before noon. Amelia read it at the post office counter because she couldn't wait the 6 miles back to the ranch. The postmaster, a thin man named Gerald, who had the discretion of someone who had spent 30 years handling other people's correspondence, pretended to reorganize something behind the counter while she read. The filing had been accepted. The legal record was established. Daniel Mercer had 7 days to respond through proper channels, and until a judge ruled otherwise, Lydia Mercer was under no legal obligation to return to the marital property. Crane had also included a second note, written in a smaller hand at the bottom of the page, that said, "Word from a colleague in the county seat suggests Caldwell's man has already tried to file a counter document. It was rejected on procedural grounds. This is good for your party, but do not assume it ends here. These men have money and patience. Prepare accordingly." She folded the letter and put it in her coat pocket and said thank you to Gerald, who was still pretending to organize things, and walked out into the gray morning. She stood on the boardwalk for a moment. Prepare accordingly. She thought about what that meant. She thought about Nathan Caldwell, who had money and patience, as Crane said, and who had been publicly outmaneuvered twice now, once on the train platform in February and once at the ranch when she'd told him to his face that she wasn't afraid of him. She thought about Daniel Mercer, who was a different kind of problem, less calculating than Nathan, more visceral, the kind of man who felt things as challenges to his body rather than his mind, and who had not yet responded to the filing with anything except silence, which was not the same as acceptance. She thought about Lydia, who was at the ranch right now, who had been sleeping better in the past 2 weeks than she had in 3 years, who had started to take up space in a way she hadn't when she first arrived. Sitting at the table instead of perching at the edge of it, speaking in the full volume of her voice instead of the cautious half volume of a woman who has learned that being heard leads to being corrected. She thought, we are not done, but we are further along than we were. She got back on the bay mare and rode home. And then, she told Caleb and Lydia together at the kitchen table with the letter on the table between them. Lydia read it twice. Her face went through something complicated and came out the other side looking like a woman who had been handed something she'd wanted so badly she hadn't let herself believe it was possible, and now had to figure out what to do with actually having it. 7 days for him to respond, she said. Through proper channels, Amelia said, meaning through a lawyer, meaning he has to engage the process instead of showing up with ranch hands. He won't like that. No, Caleb said. He won't. Lydia set the letter down. What does Caldwell do now? He can't just... He'll find another angle, Caleb said. Nathan always does. He was looking at the letter, not at either of them. He's had 3 months to watch us and think. He knows the layout of the property. He knows who we deal with in town. He'll find something we haven't thought of. Then we think of it first, Amelia said. Caleb looked at her. We go through it, she said. Everything he could use, every weak point. She spread her hands on the table. The land title, your contracts with the cattle buyers, Lydia's situation, whatever my presence here looks like legally if he tried to make something of it. Your presence here is a private arrangement, Caleb said. He can't touch that. He can make it look like something it isn't. He already has, Caleb said, to anyone who is going to believe the worst of it. Those people have already made up their minds. This was true. She'd heard it from Opal Driscoll, who heard things at the schoolhouse the way teachers hear things. Children repeated what their parents said, unselfconsciously, and Opal had mentioned with careful delicacy that a few families in town had opinions about the nature of the arrangement at the Wilder Ranch. A widow, a runaway wife, and a bachelor rancher, all under the same roof. She could hear the shape of what people made of it. It bothers you, Caleb said. Not accusatory, just noting. What other people think of me bothers me less than it used to, she said. What they think of Lily bothers me more. Caleb was quiet. She's 4 next month, Amelia said. She's going to start wanting to come to town more. School in a few years. I don't want her growing up as the subject of a story someone else wrote about her mother. She won't be, Caleb said. He said it with the flat certainty of someone making a statement about weather. Not a promise exactly, because promises implied that the outcome was uncertain, a fact he was simply stating. This town watched Nathan Caldwell humiliate you on that platform in February. A good portion of them felt sick about it and didn't do anything. They've had 7 months to work out how they feel about that. Lily is going to grow up in this town as the daughter of the woman who didn't fold when a man tried to break her. That's the story. Amelia looked at him. That's the story, he said again. Quieter. She looked at the letter on the table. She looked at Lydia, who was watching Caleb with an expression that was some combination of gratitude and surprise, the expression of someone hearing out loud something they hadn't known they needed to hear. All right, Amelia said. She almost said something else. She stopped herself because Lydia was there, and because the kitchen table at midday was not quite the right place for the other thing she was thinking, which was related to what Caleb had just said, but was also bigger than it, or deeper, and needed a different kind of moment. She got up and put the kettle on instead. Bassem, the next week was quiet in the way that things are quiet when they are building towards something. Not peaceful, exactly, but still. Nathan Caldwell made no appearances. Daniel Mercer did not come to the ranch. The response deadline passed, and they received word from Crane that Daniel had filed through a lawyer in town, as required, challenging the grounds of the separation and claiming that Lydia had left without cause, which was exactly what they'd expected and what Crane had already prepared for. It's a process now, Amelia told Lydia. It moves through the courts. It's slow and it's frustrating, but it's real, and it's harder for them to bully a court than to bully a person. Lydia nodded. She understood this. She was learning, in the months since she'd arrived, to understand things differently than she had before, to trust process rather than depending on goodwill, to look for structures and systems that held weight independently of whether the people involved in them were decent. She was, Amelia thought, the kind of woman who had been very badly served by the life that had happened to her, and who, given a different set of circumstances, would have been formidable. She was starting to look formidable. It was good to watch. On a Wednesday in early July, Helen Marsh came to the ranch with Frances Hale, and the 4 of them, Helen, Frances, Lydia, and Amelia, sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours and talked about what the next phase looked like. Frances had spoken to Emmett about additional documentation. Helen had talked to 2 other women in town who had quietly mentioned their own experiences with Daniel Mercer over the years. Not the same as Lydia's, but in the same register, the register of a man who considered the women around him to be objects of his management rather than people with their own standing. They won't testify, Helen said, at least not yet, but they know, and they'll talk to the women they trust, and those women will talk, and by the time this gets to a judge, the community understanding of who Daniel Mercer is will be a different thing than it was. That's not justice, Lydia said. That's just reputation. In a small territory, Helen said, reputation is most of justice. The formal kind catches up eventually. The community kind moves faster. Lydia was quiet, looking at her hands. I know it's not enough, Helen said. Her voice was gentler now. I know you wanted it to be over by now. I know every day it isn't over is another day you're holding your breath. But you're not doing this alone, and that matters more than it might feel like it does right now. Amelia watched Lydia take that in. She thought about her own February, about Helen Marsh appearing in the general store 3 days after the train platform and extending her hand and saying, without prelude, I want you to know that what Nathan Caldwell did was contemptible. She thought about what it had meant to have someone standing on the same side without being asked. She thought about what it meant to know that Caleb was 6 miles east of town working the south pasture fence, and that she was here at this table with these women, and that all of it, the ranch, the garden, the Saturday suppers, Lily learning to ride a horse, had assembled itself around her without her quite noticing it assembling. She thought, this is what belonging looks like. Not a single moment. All these moments accumulated. Nathan Caldwell's next move was not what any of them had anticipated, which was the point. He didn't come to the ranch. He didn't send Daniel Mercer. He went to the bank. The Red Bluff Merchants Bank had a small office on the main street staffed by a manager named Herbert Poole, who was an adequate banker and an inadequate person, in the sense that he was the kind of man who made his decisions based on who in a room had the most obvious money and adjusted his principles accordingly. Nathan Caldwell had an obvious amount of money. What he did, as Caleb found out on a Thursday morning when he went to the bank to discuss the seasonal line of credit he'd been using for 12 years without incident, was tell Herbert Poole that Caleb Wilder's operation had become a reputational liability for the bank's other clients, that the presence of two women of uncertain standing on the property, combined with the ongoing legal dispute involving one of them, suggested instability, that the bank might want to reconsider the terms of any credit arrangements with the Wilder Ranch until the situation resolved itself. Herbert Poole had not canceled the credit. He didn't quite have the courage for that, but he'd flagged it, put a question on it, suggested it would need to be reviewed by the board, which in practical terms meant a delay of 6 weeks at minimum, and Caleb needed the credit line to purchase the summer cattle for the fall operation, and 6 weeks meant missing the window. Caleb came home from town and told Amelia at the kitchen table, and his voice was even, but his jaw was set in the particular way that meant he was working very hard to be even. He found the one thing, Caleb said, the one angle that actually costs us something. How much does the line of credit matter? If I don't buy summer cattle in the next 3 weeks, I'm running a smaller operation this fall, maybe significantly smaller. It affects the whole year. He looked at the table. I've never missed that window in 12 years. Amelia said, Who sits on the bank board? Caleb looked up. The board that's reviewing the decision, she said. Who are they? He thought. Robert Marsh, Emmett Hale, Gideon Stroud. He's the dry goods man. He's fine. Margaret Poole, Herbert's wife. She's actually better than her husband. He paused. And Nathan Caldwell. Nathan sits on the bank board, she said. Has for 6 years. She sat with that for a moment. Robert and Emmett, she said. They're already on our side. That's 2 of 5. If Margaret Poole is as reasonable as you say, that's 3. 3 of 5 isn't a certainty. And even if it goes our way, Nathan will find another lever. He will, she agreed. But we deal with this lever first. She stood up. I'm going to talk to Helen. Amelia, he's been doing this since February, she said. He finds a new angle, we find a response, he finds another angle. At some point, we have to stop responding and start putting him on the defensive. She looked at him. The board meets when? Tuesday. Then I have 4 days. She picked up her coat. Helen knows Margaret Poole. Francis Hale is married to Emmett. We already have the relationships. We just need to use them. She went to see Helen that afternoon, and she laid out what she knew, and Helen listened with the focused attention of a woman who was very good at this particular kind of problem. When Amelia finished, Helen was quiet for a moment, tapping one finger on the kitchen table. Margaret Poole has not liked Nathan Caldwell for 5 years, she said, since he made a comment at a town meeting about women's opinions on financial matters that she has not forgotten and will not forget. She paused. Let me talk to her. And Emmett, Robert will talk to Emmett. Robert doesn't like to meddle in things, but he likes injustice less, and this is straightforward enough. Helen looked at her. What about Nathan himself? What stops him from doing this again, with a different institution, a different pressure point? Nothing stops him, Amelia said, unless his reputation in this town becomes a cost he can't afford. Helen looked at her steadily. You're talking about making his behavior public. I'm talking about telling the truth, Amelia said, in places where the truth is useful. He stood on that platform in February and humiliated me in front of 20 people. He came to this ranch twice and threatened me. He tried to interfere with Lydia's legal filing. He went to the bank to pressure Caleb's credit line. These are facts. They have witnesses. I am not going to organize a campaign against him. I'm going to tell the truth about what he's done to anyone who asks. Helen considered this. And some people will take his side. Some people will, Amelia said. That's always true. I can't control that. No, Helen agreed. You can't. She stood up. I'll talk to Margaret tomorrow morning. Come to supper Saturday. I'll have something to tell you by then. The board met on Tuesday and the vote was 3-2 in favor of releasing the credit line as arranged. Nathan voted against and Herbert Poole voted against, and Margaret Poole, Robert Marsh, and Gideon Stroud voted in favor. And Caleb came home from that meeting and told Amelia, and she was in the garden when he found her, on her knees in the dirt between the zinnia rows, and he crouched down to be at her level and told her. And she sat back on her heels and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since Thursday. 3-2, she said. 3-2. She looked at the zinnias. They were in full flower now, orange and red and yellow against the July sky, crooked and stubborn and entirely inappropriate for a working ranch, and she felt something she couldn't quite name looking at them. Something that was part relief and part satisfaction, and part the particular emotion of seeing a thing survive that wasn't supposed to. "He's not done," Caleb said. "I know." "He's going to be angry, a man like Nathan, losing a board vote." "I know," she said again. "But he lost it. That's real. You have the credit line. We have 3 more days before the cattle window closes, and Nathan Caldwell had to sit at a table and watch 3 people vote against him." She looked at Caleb. "Let him be angry. He can be angry from a distance." Caleb was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her in that focused, considering way she had come to recognize Ugh, the way he looked at things he was deciding about, giving them his full attention. "I want to ask you something," he said. The quality of the air changed slightly. She recognized that too. The shift that happened when he was about to say something he'd been working up to for a while. "All right," she said. He was quiet for another moment. A cloud moved over the sun and the shadow passed across the garden. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not the way it's been. Not as an arrangement. I want you to stay because this is yours as much as it's mine. You and Lily both." He paused. "I've been thinking about how to say this for a while, and I don't have a better version than that. This place is different than it was before you came. I'm different. I didn't expect that, and I don't have a lot of experience with saying this kind of thing out loud, so I apologize if it's not—" "Caleb," she said. He stopped. She was still on her knees in the dirt between the zinnia rows, and he was crouched in front of her, and his hat was in his hands. And he looked, for the first time since she'd known him, uncertain. Not afraid, but uncertain, like a man who has moved with complete confidence through every practical difficulty and has arrived at the one thing that practical confidence doesn't cover. She thought about Thomas. She let herself think about him fully, which she didn't always do. About his laugh and his sawdust smell, and the way he'd looked at her in the early days, like she was something that had happened to him that he couldn't quite believe was real. She let herself feel the loss of him, which she would feel for the rest of her life. Not because it never got smaller, but because it was real, and it had been real, and pretending otherwise was a kind of dishonesty she couldn't manage. And then she thought about this man crouched in front of her with his hat in his hands, who had stepped between her and cruelty the first day they met, who had built a fence around her flower patch without mentioning it, who had come to Billings because he wanted to come. She thought, this is not the same as before. This is not a letter. This is not a promise from a man who doesn't know me. She thought, this is a man who has seen me at my worst and my most frightened and my most stubborn, and he's still here, crouched in the garden, hat in his hands, trying to find the words. "I know it's not the same as what you had," he said. He was watching her face, reading something in it. "I'm not trying to replace anything. You're not replacing anything," she said. "That's not—" She stopped. She put down the trowel she'd been holding. "Thomas was the first half of my life, and he was good, and I loved him, and he's gone. That's a real thing, and it doesn't go away." She looked at Caleb. "But this is the second half, and I'd like to spend it here, with you." She paused. "If you're still asking—" "I'm still asking," he said. "Then yes," she said. "We'll stay." He didn't say anything to that. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded, the same slow nod he used for things that were decided and needed no further comment, and stood up and held out his hand to help her up from the dirt. She took it. His hand was large and rough and warm, and he held hers the way you hold something you're glad to have. Not tight, not possessive, just present. They stood in the garden for a moment, among the crooked zinnias, not saying anything. Then he said, "The cattle auction is Thursday. I need to be in town by 7. "I know," she said. "I'll have breakfast ready at 6. He let go of her hand and went back to the barn, and she turned back to the garden, and that was how they settled it. Not with any great ceremony, not with any declaration that the world needed to ratify, just the two of them knowing what they knew and going back to the work of the day. It was the most honest transaction she'd ever been part of. The day Daniel Mercer came back was a Saturday, and it had all the markings of something that had been planned rather than something that had simply happened. He came in the late morning, and this time he had 4 men with him instead of 2, and he had a piece of paper that he held up as he rode toward the house, which she recognized as the move of a man who had been told the legal route hadn't worked and had decided to find a version of legality that looked right on the surface. Caleb was in the yard. He'd seen them coming from the barn, and he was standing between them and the house when they pulled up, and his hands were at his sides, but there was something in his posture that was very clear about what those hands were prepared to do. Amelia was on the porch. She had not planned what happened next. It was not a plan. It was simply that when she heard Daniel Mercer's voice say, "I have a paper signed by a justice of the peace in Billings that says my wife is to be returned," something in her went very flat and very quiet, and she was down the porch steps and across the yard before she decided to move. "Let me see that," she said. Daniel looked at her. She could see him deciding whether to address her or ignore her. He decided to address her, which was a mistake because it put the document in her reach. She held out her hand and didn't move, and he looked at Caleb and then back at her. And the calculation he did must have arrived at something like, this woman is going to stand here until I hand it over, because he handed it over. She read it. She read it carefully, twice, the way her father had always told her to read anything that anyone was using to claim authority over something that mattered. "This is not a court order," she said. It's signed by a justice of the peace in Billings, who is not the judge assigned to this case, who has no jurisdiction over a legal filing already entered into the territorial court record, and who cannot override a process that was initiated first. She looked up at Daniel. "Mr. Crane explained this to us when he filed Lydia's papers. A signature from a JP who doesn't know the full record means nothing against a prior court filing. This paper doesn't compel anything." One of Daniel's men shifted. Another one looked at his employer with an expression that suggested he was reassessing how this morning was going to go. Daniel looked at the paper, then at Amelia. "You're not a lawyer," he said. "No," she said, "but I read the filing. I read everything Arthur Crane sent us. And I can read this." She held it out to him. "You paid someone to write a document that looks official. It isn't. And the people you have with you," she looked at the 4 men on their horses, "are ranch hands, not officers of the court. They can't enforce something a court hasn't ordered." The yard was very quiet. Caleb had not moved. He was watching Amelia with the attention he gave to things that had his full interest. Daniel took the paper back. His face was doing something that was working very hard to stay composed and not quite succeeding. "You have inserted yourself into something that is not your business," he said. His voice was low and controlled, the voice of a man who has learned to keep his anger internal and is right at the edge of that capacity. "You have interfered in a marriage that doesn't concern you. You have encouraged my wife to make a public spectacle of something that was private, and you have—" "She came to us with bruises on her face," Amelia said. "She rode 9 miles on a horse because she was afraid of what you would do to her if she stayed another night. That is what I know about your marriage." She looked at him directly. "There was nothing private about what you did to her. Private is just the word for when no one else has seen it yet." The silence after that was very long. Daniel Mercer looked at her, and she looked back at him, and neither of them moved. And the 4 men behind him were very still, and Caleb was very still. And somewhere behind her she could hear Porter moving on the porch, and the distant sound of Lily's voice from inside the house, talking to Lydia about something, ordinary and unaware. "You will regret this," Daniel said. "Everyone seems to think I'm going to regret things," Amelia said. "So far, I'm managing fine." He held her gaze for another moment. Then he looked past her, toward the house, toward the window where Lydia had appeared and was standing watching, and something moved in his face, something that was not contrition and not defeat, but was, perhaps, the first sign that what he'd believed was simply true about how this was going to go had begun to develop a crack. He turned his horse and rode away, and his men went with him. Amelia stood in the yard until they were off the property. Then she turned around. Caleb was looking at her. Behind her, she heard the porch door open, and she looked over her shoulder and saw Lydia standing on the steps with her hands held together in front of her and her face doing something she couldn't read. And then she could read it. It was relief so profound it looked like pain, the kind of relief that comes when a thing you've dreaded so long it has become structural to your fear finally passes. "He's gone," Amelia said. Lydia nodded. She pressed her lips together and nodded again and didn't say anything. "Not for good," Amelia said, "but for today." "For today," Lydia said. "Yes." She looked at Amelia. How did you know about the paper?" "Crane's letters," Amelia said. "I kept all of them. I read them more than once." She paused. "I've spent 7 months learning that the people who want to take things from you rely on you not knowing the rules. So I learned the rules." Lydia looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Thank you." Amelia shook her head. "You came 9 miles on a horse," she said. "You signed your name to papers when you knew what it would cost you. You did that." Caleb came to stand beside her. She felt him there before she heard him, the particular weight of his presence, which had become as familiar to her as the sound of the stove in the morning or the way the north wind came across the pasture before rain. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, and she stood there beside him, and the yard was quiet in the July morning with the zinnias in the garden and the horses in the corral and Lily's voice inside the house, still talking about something, still ordinary, still unaware of how close the world had pressed in this morning and how it had been held back. She thought about February, about the train platform and the suitcase and $17 and a child who needed to eat dinner. She thought about all the things she had not had then. She looked at the house, at the garden, at Caleb beside her, and Lydia on the porch, and Porter now descending the steps with the dignified concern of a dog who has sensed that something significant has occurred and wants to be included in the aftermath. She thought, this is what I built instead, not what I came for, not what I was promised, something else, something that had no name for it yet, except here, except mine, except the specific, irreplaceable weight of a life that had accumulated around her without asking permission, one ordinary day at a time. Nathan Caldwell was still in Red Bluff. The courts were still moving slowly. Daniel Mercer had not given up, and she knew it, could feel it in the way the morning had gone, the way his eyes had looked when he turned his horse. Not a man who had stopped, but a man who had paused. There was still more of this to get through, but she was still standing, and the house was behind her, and Caleb was beside her, and inside her daughter was talking about something that had made her laugh, and that laugh was traveling out through the kitchen window on the morning air like it was looking for somewhere to land. She let it land. She turned and went back inside. The letter from Arthur Crane arrived on a Thursday morning in late August, and this time Amelia did not read it at the post office counter. She put it in her coat pocket and rode the 6 miles back to the ranch with it sitting there against her ribs, and she did not take it out until she was at the kitchen table with Caleb across from her, and Lydia at the stove, and Lily outside with Porter doing something that involved a great deal of running based on the noise coming through the window. She opened it and read it aloud. The territorial court had ruled. The separation was granted on grounds of documented physical harm, supported by the medical witness statement of Dr. Emmett Hale, the legal filing initiated in July, and 3 additional written accounts from women in the county who had, in the end, decided that silence was costing them more than speaking. Daniel Mercer had contested it and lost. His lawyer had tried twice to have the ruling reconsidered and been denied both times. The North pasture, which Nathan Caldwell had been counting on as collateral, would remain part of the Mercer property under Lydia's name as the separation settlement, because the judge, a deliberate man from Billings named Horace Webb, who had a reputation for reading documents very carefully, had found the original loan terms between Caldwell and Mercer to contain irregularities that invalidated the collateral clause. Nathan Caldwell had, in trying to use Daniel Mercer's land as leverage over Lydia, overreached in a way that cost him the asset entirely. Amelia finished reading. The kitchen was quiet. Lydia had turned from the stove. She was holding a wooden spoon, and she was very still, and her face had gone through something that Amelia couldn't fully track. Too many things at once. the way a sky goes through weather when a front moves in fast. The North Pasture, Lydia said. In your name, Amelia said, as part of the settlement. That's the only profitable. I know. Lydia set down the spoon. She sat down at the table, not in her usual chair but in the nearest one, like her legs had made the decision before her mind did. She put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. It's over, she said. She said it like a question and a statement at the same time because that was what it was. She was testing the words to see if they held weight, to see if they meant what they appeared to mean. The legal part is over, Caleb said. He said it carefully, which was honest. Daniel isn't going to change into a different person, but he can't use the courts against you anymore, and without the Caldwell money behind him, he can't afford much else. Lydia nodded slowly. You have land, Amelia said, in your name. That's real. That's something nobody can walk up to you and take back. Lydia looked at her. Her eyes were bright, and she was clearly not going to cry, with the determined not crying of a woman who has decided that she has cried enough over this particular set of circumstances and is done with it. I don't know how to run a cattle operation, she said. Nobody does the first year, Caleb said. Did you? I lost money the first 2 years, he said. Made it back in the third. It's a process. Lydia looked at him, then at Amelia, then back at her hands on the table. I'm going to need help, she said. You have help, Amelia said, simply, without elaboration, because it didn't need elaboration. Outside, Lily's voice rose in a shout of laughter about something Porter had done, and the sound of it came through the window and filled the kitchen, and Amelia thought, there it is. That's the sound of the world when it's working the way it should. Nathan Caldwell left Red Bluff in September. It wasn't announced. There was no public departure, no farewell. He was simply there 1 week and not there the next. And the week after that, the word moved through town the way word moves in small places, from Helen Marsh outward in all directions, that Nathan had sold his property to a cattle consortium out of Helena and relocated, destination unspecified, probably somewhere that didn't know his name yet. Amelia heard it from Helen on a Saturday and felt something she hadn't quite expected, which was almost nothing. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not relief. Just the particular quiet of an absence. The way a noise you've been living with for so long you'd stopped hearing it finally stops, and you notice not the sound but the silence where it was. He didn't say goodbye to anyone, Helen said. She was trying to read Amelia's face and not quite getting what she expected. No, Amelia said. Doesn't that... He was never going to apologize, Amelia said. I stopped waiting for that a long time ago. She thought about it. He did what men like him do when they lose. He found somewhere new to be someone else. She paused. I hope the somewhere new has fewer people he can hurt, but I'm not going to spend my time hoping for things Nathan Caldwell does or doesn't do. Helen studied her. You've changed, she said. Everyone changes, Amelia said. Not everyone changes the way you have. When you got off that train in February, I know what I looked like in February, Amelia said, not unkindly. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad you stayed. Amelia looked at her, at this woman who had appeared in a general store 3 days after the worst morning of Amelia's recent life, and extended her hand and taken aside without being asked. She thought about everything that had come out of that. The Saturday suppers, the bank board vote, the letters to Billings, the women who had eventually written their accounts for the court. Helen Marsh had been the first thread in a net that had, over 8 months, held a great deal of weight. So am I, Amelia said. Down. She and Caleb married in October on a Wednesday because Wednesday was a practical day that didn't require anyone to stop their work for long. It was not a large event. The sheriff of Red Bluff, a steady man named Bill Kress, who had, over the previous 8 months, proven himself to be exactly what Caleb had said, a fair man, performed the civil ceremony in his office, which was small and smelled like wood smoke and old paper. The witnesses were Helen and Robert Marsh, Emmett and Francis Hale, Opal Driscoll and Lydia, who had moved back to the Mercer property, hers now. She had started calling it the Mercer land, but without Daniel's name attached, just the land, but came into town for this. Lily stood beside Amelia in a dress that Helen had helped her hem the previous Saturday, and she held Amelia's hand during the ceremony with the solemn attention of a child who understands that this is important without fully understanding why. And when Bill Kress said the final words and Caleb and Amelia signed the paper, Lily looked up at Caleb and said, in a carrying voice, "Are you my papa now?" Caleb looked down at her. The room was very quiet for a moment. "If you want me to be," he said. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to most significant questions. "I want you to be," she said, "but you still have to laugh more." "I'll work on it," he said. "You've been saying that since March," she told him. Robert Marsh made a sound that was clearly a laugh suppressed at the last second. Frances Hale did not suppress hers. Helen was smiling at the wall in the particular way of someone pretending not to be delighted. Caleb looked at Amelia. Amelia looked at him and thought, There it is. Because there was something in his face that she had not seen before, not in exactly this form. Not the almost smile he gave the flower patch, not the measured warmth he showed Lily on horseback, but something fuller than both of those, something that had let its guard down for a moment and was standing there without its armor on. He was happy. She thought, I did that. We did that. This 3-year-old with opinions about laughter, and this man who barely spoke when I met him, and 9 months of ordinary days, and here we are, in the sheriff's office on a Wednesday in October, and he is happy. It was not a perfect moment. Frances Hale knocked over the inkwell on the desk immediately after, and there was a significant amount of confusion about the blotter, and Lily decided this was an excellent time to ask if they were going to have cake, and Bill Kress had to rewrite one line of the document because the ink had spread in an unfortunate direction. But Caleb signed his name beside hers on the corrected paper, and it was real, and it held. Amelia's first winter in Montana as a married woman was different from her first winter as a woman in Montana, and the difference was not primarily about comfort, though there was more of that. It was about the texture of the days. The first winter, she had woken every morning calculating what she had, what she needed, what the day required of her in terms of maintaining a situation that felt temporary, provisional, subject to revision at any moment by forces she couldn't fully control. She had worked hard, and the work had been good, but underneath it was always that particular hum of uncertainty, the low-grade vigilance of a person who does not yet trust that the ground will hold. This winter, she still worked hard. The ranch did not become easier because she was married to the man who owned it. The stove still needed the damper adjusted at 6 a.m. The fence line still needed walking after heavy snow. The accounts still needed keeping, and the cattle still needed managing, and Lily still needed breakfast and supervision and someone to listen to the detailed narratives she produced about Porter's daily activities. But underneath the work, the hum was different. It was not silence. She was not a woman who arrived at simple peace easily, and she knew herself well enough to know she probably never would be. But it was steadier. It was the sound of a life that was actually hers, built on ground that she had helped build, and that was an entirely different thing to stand on than borrowed ground. She thought about this one morning in December, standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, watching Caleb move across the yard toward the barn. The snow was coming down lightly, the kind of snow that floats rather than falls, and he moved through it with his usual unhurried efficiency. And she watched him go and felt the specific, undramatic warmth of knowing that this was not a letter, not a promise, not someone else's idea of what her life should look like. This was just her life, the actual one. Lily appeared beside her, still in her nightgown, her hair occupying several different directions at once. She looked out the window, found Caleb, and was satisfied. "Is he going to feed the horses?" she said. "He is." "Can I go?" "After breakfast." Lily accepted this with minimal protest, which meant she was in a good mood. She climbed onto the bench at the table, and Amelia poured her milk and made the oatmeal and thought about how many mornings they had done this exact sequence of things, and how it had accumulated one morning on top of another into something she would describe to anyone who asked as simply her life. She would not call it what she'd been looking for when she'd left Missouri. She hadn't been looking for this. She'd been looking for safety, for a room, for someone to help her raise Lily, for something stable in a world that had become very unstable very fast. She had not been looking for Caleb Wilder, for the fence around the zinnia patch, for Saturday suppers at Helen Marsh's house, for Lydia standing on a porch with her hands folded, for a sheriff's office in October with an ink spill and a 4-year-old asking about cake. She had not been looking for any of this specifically, but she had walked toward what was in front of her, every time, even when what was in front of her was frightening or uncertain or not at all what she'd expected. She had kept walking forward because the only alternative was standing still, and she had never been very good at standing still. That, she thought, was what she would tell Lily when Lily was old enough to ask about it. Not everything works out, because it didn't always, and the version of that story that left out Thomas's death and the train platform and Nathan Caldwell's face was not a story worth telling. Not be brave, because bravery was a word that people used for things they hadn't done themselves, and what she had actually felt, most of the time, was scared and tired and trying anyway. What she would tell Lily was, keep walking. When the ground is bad, walk carefully. When someone tries to stop you, walk around them. When you don't know where you're going, walk toward the thing that seems most real. And then she would probably have to explain what most real meant, which was hard to explain, but she thought Lily would understand it anyway, because Lily was already the kind of person who could look at a man with a hole in his elbow and tell him immediately and without hesitation what she saw. Spring came to the ranch for the second time with Amelia in it, and the zinnias came back without being replanted, which she hadn't expected. She was in the garden in early May, turning the ground for the vegetable section, when she saw the first small shoots coming up in the flower patch, tentative, pale green, barely there. She crouched and looked at them for a long time. Plants were not sentimental. Zinnias did not decide to come back because the previous year had been meaningful. They came back because seeds had dropped and conditions had been right and the ground had allowed it. That was all. It was entirely ordinary. But she stayed crouched there longer than was strictly necessary, looking at the green shoots coming up through the Montana dirt. And she thought about her father's 40 acres and the way he'd told her, some things just want to grow, Amelia. Some things, you put them in the ground and they figure out the rest. She heard Caleb's boots on the path behind her. He stopped. She didn't turn. She heard him see what she was looking at. They came back, he said. They did. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know they did that. Neither did I, she said. I've never planted them in a place where I stayed long enough to find out. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of May morning that made winter feel like a lie, and the light was the thin gold of early season, and behind her she could hear Lily in the yard telling Porter something complicated. Caleb crouched beside her. They were both looking at the shoots. Lily told me this morning that she wants to get another dog, he said. She says Porter is lonely. Porter is not lonely. Porter has us. I told her that. She says it's different. Amelia looked at the shoots. Is she right? She's usually right, he said. Amelia smiled, not the careful, restrained version she'd arrived in Montana with, the smile of a woman who had learned to show less than she felt because showing it cost too much. The other kind. The kind that had come back gradually, the way the zinnias had come back, not because she'd decided to be happy, but because conditions had been right and something in her had figured out the rest. Then we'll get another dog, she said. I'll tell her. He paused. She's going to name it something terrible. She named the last one Porter. Porter is a fine name, he said. She wanted to name him Biscuit. We talked her out of it. We did, Amelia said. I don't think we'll be so lucky this time. Caleb made a sound that was, unambiguously, a laugh. Short, quiet, not the performed laughter of a man trying to be pleasant. Just the involuntary kind, the kind that comes out when something lands right. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the zinnias, still smiling slightly, and the morning light was on his face, and he looked like a man who had not laughed easily for a long time and was getting better at it. She thought of Lily, 8 months ago at the supper table. You should laugh more. I think it's important. She thought, you were right, baby. You were right about that one, too. Lydia came to Sunday supper in May with news of her own. She had spent the winter learning the cattle operation with the help of Ed Cower from the neighboring property, who had turned out to be a patient teacher, and she had hired 2 ranch hands in March who were, by her account, adequate at the work and willing to take direction from a woman without requiring daily reminders that they should. The north pasture is good, she told them over Helen Marsh's table, with all the usual faces around it, plus a few new ones. Opal Driscoll had brought a young man she was clearly trying not to seem too pleased about, and Lily had fallen asleep against Amelia's arm before the second course. The winter was harder than I expected, but I didn't lose any cattle, and the spring count looks right. That's a good first winter, Caleb said. It was an education, Lydia said. She said it with a dryness that made Robert Marsh laugh. She had developed that quality over the winter. The dryness, the willingness to say the honest version of a thing in a room full of people. It suited her. It had always been in her somewhere. It just needed a year of being somewhere safe to come out. What about Daniel? Helen asked carefully. Lydia looked at her plate for a moment. He's still in the county. He's at the south property. His operation is smaller without the north pasture. She paused. I saw him in town last month. He walked the other way. Good, Frances Hale said, with a precision that suggested she had opinions about Daniel Mercer that she generally kept professional. Yes, Lydia said. I suppose it is. Amelia watched her from across the table and thought about the woman who had ridden 9 miles on a horse in June with a bruise on her jaw and asked, at the gate, "Is this Wilder Ranch?" in a voice that was steady because it had decided to be. She thought about the word that Crane had used in his final letter, settled. The case was settled, the land was settled, and Lydia, who had spent 3 years in a house that was not safe and not hers, was building something that was both. These things did not have perfect endings. Daniel Mercer was not in prison. Nathan Caldwell had not faced any formal consequence for what he'd done to Amelia on that train platform, or for trying to use Lydia's suffering as a financial instrument. The world was not just in a clean, satisfying way. It was just in the partial, imperfect, accumulated way of things that are worked at over time by people who don't give up. Amelia had made her peace with that. Not because injustice didn't matter. It did, and she felt it. And there were nights still when she thought about Nathan's face on the platform and felt something hot and unresolved about it. But because waiting for the world to be just before she built her life in it was waiting forever, and she did not have forever to wait. She had this table, this room, this particular Tuesday in May with her daughter asleep against her arm, and her husband at the end of the table telling Lydia something about spring cattle that was practical and useful and exactly what she needed to know. She had this, and it was real, and real was what she'd been looking for all along, even when she hadn't known that was the word for it. Kinneb. After supper, while Helen and Frances were in the kitchen and the men were on the porch and Lily was still asleep on the settee, Lydia sat beside Amelia in the front room and said, quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," Amelia said, "when you were on that train, coming out here, when you thought you knew what you were coming to." Lydia paused. "Were you happy? On the train? Before you knew?" Amelia thought about it honestly. About the 2 days on the train with Lily sleeping across her lap, about the rehearsed imagining of the platform, the decent man, the rooms with enough space for them both. "I was hopeful," she said. "I don't know if that's the same as happy. I was very tired, and I was afraid, and I was hopeful, all at the same time." "And now?" Amelia looked at the window, at the dark outside, at the faint reflection of the lamp in the glass. "Now I don't have to rehearse things," she said. "I used to rehearse everything. What I would say, what I would do, who I would be in the life I was trying to get to. Now I just—" She thought about it. "I just live it, the actual version, which is messier and louder and less like what I imagined and more like what I need." Lydia was quiet. "The hard thing," Amelia said, "is that you don't know, while it's being built, what it's going to look like. You're just putting pieces together in the dark, hoping they fit, and then one day there's enough light to see the shape of it." She looked at Lydia. "You're still in the dark part, but you have the land. You have the knowledge. You have people in this room who are on your side because they chose to be, not because they had to be." "Is that enough?" Lydia said. "To start with?" Amelia thought about February, about a train platform, and a suitcase, and $17, and Lily's hand in hers. "It's more than enough," she said. "It's everything." From the porch, she heard Caleb's voice, low, unhurried, saying something that made Robert Marsh laugh. From the kitchen, Francis Hale's voice and Helen's answer, and the sound of dishes being stacked. From the settee, Lily's slow, even breathing, the breathing of a child who is entirely safe and knows it in her bones even in sleep. Amelia sat in Helen Marsh's front room in Red Bluff, Montana, and she thought about all the things she had not known back in February, back on the platform, back when the world had been reduced to its smallest, most frightening dimensions. She had not known that the man with the hole in his elbow would become the person she trusted most. She had not known that the woman named Helen, who appeared in a general store, would become the kind of friend you measure your life against. She had not known that a town that had watched her be humiliated would, one ordinary day at a time, become the town that knew her name as something else. Not the abandoned mail-order bride, not Nathan Caldwell's punchline, but just Amelia Wilder, who had come from Missouri with a child and built something here, who had a garden with flowers that came back on their own, who sat on the bankboard now herself because Helen had asked her to, and she had said yes. She had not known any of it was coming. She had just kept walking toward what was in front of her, and what was in front of her had, against most reasonable expectation, turned out to be this. Not what she'd been promised, not what she'd imagined. Better, in all the ways that matter, the ways you can't rehearse for, the ways that only become visible when you stop looking for the version you planned and start living the version you have. She had come to Montana looking for a husband. She had found something she didn't have a word for until she was standing in it, and then the word was simple. Home. Not a place. A thing built, piece by piece, from honesty and work and the particular stubbornness of someone who has decided not to disappear just because someone wanted her to. From the choice, made over and over without ceremony, to stay. The lamp burned low. Outside, the Montana night was enormous and quiet. Somewhere in it, the zinnias were resting in the dark, and in the morning they would be there again, crooked and bright and entirely unimpressed by everything that had tried to prevent them from growing. Amelia closed her eyes for a moment. She listened to her life. It sounded exactly like this.